The crystalline halls of Nexus Prime glittered like frozen starlight as representatives from 12 galactic powers gathered for the first Council of Stars in 300 years. This station floated in neutral space, built by ancient hands long before any current species had crawled from their birth worlds. And it served one purpose only: to host meetings between powers that could destroy each other 1,000 times over. Ambassador Leering, Kale of the Volanthi hegemony, walked through the grand reception hall with grace that seemed almost liquid, her bioluminescent skin pulsing soft blues and greens as she exchanged greetings with delegates from across known space. The Volanthi were ancient mediators, trusted by all and feared by none. And Leering had spent 600 years earning her reputation as the finest diplomat her species had ever produced. She paused to speak with Sorrel of the Threshian Collective, a mantis-like creature whose blade arms could cut through starship hulls but whose mind held poetry that made worlds weep. They discussed art and philosophy, while around them the fate of trillions hung in careful balance in the far corner of the hall. Largely ignored by the galactic elite, stood humanity's delegation. 3 humans in simple black uniforms watched the proceedings with expressions that ranged from wonder to careful calculation. Commander Marcus Cole stood slightly apart from his colleagues, a glass of untouched wine in his hand, his eyes never stopping their slow sweep of the room. Humanity had discovered faster than light travel only 40 years ago, a heartbeat in galactic terms, and their invitation to the council was widely understood to be a courtesy extended to children who might one day matter. The Korath delegate, a massive being of living stone and flowing magma, had actually patted Marcus on the head when they first met, rumbling something about how adorable it was that the little Deathworlders had learned to build starships. Marcus had smiled and said nothing. He was very good at saying nothing while his mind worked behind calm eyes. The reception continued for hours as species that had warred for millennia pretended to enjoy each other's company. Alliances were proposed and rejected through careful implications hidden in toasts about friendship. Trade agreements worth more than Earth's entire economy were negotiated through discussions about the quality of the appetizers. Marcus watched it all and understood perhaps 10% of what he was seeing, but that 10% was enough to worry him. 3 delegates had been watching Ambassador Leering since the reception began. Lord Vexorus of the Ascendancy of Pale Light stood near the quantum fountains, his ethereal form flickering between states of matter as he pretended to admire the artwork while his attention never left the Volanthi Ambassador High Arbiter Corax of the Dominion, a towering reptilian whose species had enforced galactic law for 10,000 years, kept finding reasons to position himself where he could observe Lyrian's movements. And Syndicate Master Grell of the Korath, that same being who had patted Marcus's head, tracked her with eyes that burned like dying stars. None of them looked at each other. None of them acknowledged any connection, but they moved in patterns that Marcus recognized from his years hunting predators on Earth and beyond. These 3 powerful beings were coordinating something, and Ambassador Leering was at the center of their attention. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, Earth's forensic specialist and one of Marcus's 2 companions, appeared at his elbow with a fresh drink he had not asked for. "You see it too," she said quietly, her lips barely moving. 3 apex predators from 3 different ecosystems, all focused on the same prey. Marcus replied in a voice that would not carry beyond her ears. "That never happens in nature unless something has already gone very wrong. What do we do about it?" "Nothing yet. We have no authority here, no power, and no proof of anything except 3 people looking at the same woman." "That bothers you. Everything bothers me. That is why they made me guardian." The title was not official in any way that the galactic community would recognize. Earth's government had simply decided that someone needed to protect human interests among the stars. And Marcus Cole had been deemed the most suitable candidate for reasons he preferred not to think about too deeply. His qualifications included 15 years of special operations work, a doctorate in xenobiology he had earned while recovering from injuries he still carried, and a willingness to do whatever was necessary to keep his people safe. The reception wound toward its close as delegates began making their farewells. Ambassador Leering moved through the crowd with genuine warmth, stopping to exchange words with even the lowliest attendants when she reached the human delegation. She did not pass them by with a polite nod as most other species had done. Instead, she stopped and smiled with what appeared to be real interest. "Commander Cole," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that soothed something deep in the human brain. "I have been hoping to speak with your delegation. Humanity is such a fascinating addition to our galactic family. You honor us." "Ambassador," Marcus replied with a small bow that he had practiced for 3 weeks before this event. "Not at all. I have studied your species since you first achieved interstellar travel, and I find you remarkable in ways I suspect you do not yet understand." "How so?" Lyrian's bioluminescence shifted to something Marcus could not interpret as she considered her words. "You come from a world that should have killed you 1,000 times over. Predators, disasters, diseases, and your own violent tendencies should have ended your story before it truly began. Yet here you stand, small and fragile and terrifyingly persistent. We prefer to think of ourselves as determined." "Yes," Lyrian said with a soft laugh that sparkled through the air like music. "I imagine you to please, Commander. If you have questions during the proceedings, do not hesitate to seek me out. I believe humanity has much to offer, and I would like to help you find your place among the stars." She moved on before Marcus could respond, leaving him with a strange feeling he could not quite name that night. As delegates retired to their quarters and the station's lights dimmed to simulate evening, Marcus stood at his window and watched the stars wheel past in their endless dance. Somewhere in this station, 3 powerful beings were planning something that involved the kindest person he had met. Since arriving, he did not know what they intended. He did not know how to stop them, but he knew with absolute certainty that he would not sleep until he understood. The night passed slowly, and Marcus kept his vigil. And when the screaming began just before dawn, he was already running toward the sound. He would arrive too late to save Ambassador Lyrian. He would not be too late to avenge her. The scream that shattered the stations. Peaceful morning was not a sound that traveled through air. It was a psychic burst of pure horror that ripped through every telepathically sensitive mind within 3 sectors, and even Marcus, who possessed no psychic ability whatsoever, felt something cold wash through his bones as he ran. He had been awake all night, watching and waiting for something he could not name. And when the wrongness hit him like a physical blow, he was already moving before his conscious mind understood why. The meditation garden occupied the heart of Nexus Prime, a sacred space designed by the station's ancient builders to evoke peace and harmony in any species that entered. Plants from 100 worlds grew in careful arrangements around pools of water that somehow reflected stars that should not have been visible from inside a station. Ambassador Lyrian Kale lay in the center of the main pathway, surrounded by a spreading pool of iridescent blood that caught the artificial starlight and scattered it into rainbows. Marcus arrived first, his human endurance and his sleepless night giving him an advantage over delegates who had been deep in slumber when the psychic scream tore through their minds. He knelt beside the body but did not touch it, his eyes recording every detail with the precision of someone who had seen death too many times to be shocked by it anymore. Lyrian's throat had been opened by 3 parallel cuts that ran from just below her left ear to the hollow of her throat. The wounds were deep and savage, far more violent than necessary to kill. And they had been made while she was still alive and aware someone had wanted her to suffer. Someone had wanted her death to mean something beyond simply removing her from the galaxy. Station security arrived 60 seconds later, led by High Arbiter Corax himself. The towering reptilian's compound eyes swept the scene with the efficiency of someone who had investigated 10,000 crimes across 10,000 years. And then those eyes fixed on Marcus with sudden intensity. "Human," Corax said in a voice like grinding stone. "You will explain your presence at this crime scene." I heard the psychic alert and responded. I was closest because I never went to sleep. "Humans are not telepathic. You could not have heard the alert." Marcus stood slowly, keeping his hands visible in a gesture of submission that cost him nothing and might buy him credibility. "You are correct that I am not telepathic. But I did not say I heard it with my mind. I said I heard the alert, and I did. My body felt something wrong, something cold. And I followed that feeling here. That is not possible, High Arbiter. I come from Earth, a world where everything wants to kill everything else, where survival depends on noticing danger before it notices you. My ancestors learned to sense wrongness long before they learned to speak. And that instinct has not left us despite all our evolution." Corax stared at him for a long moment, his massive head tilting slightly as he processed this information. Other delegates were arriving now, gathering at the garden's entrance with expressions ranging from horror to carefully concealed satisfaction. Marcus noted which faces showed which emotions and filed that information away for later. "Very well," Corax said finally. "You may remain, but you will not interfere with my investigation. I would not dream of it, however. May I share an observation?" "Speak." Marcus pointed at the wounds on Lyrian's throat without touching them. "Those cuts are designed to look like a Threshian ritual killing. The 3 parallel marks are consistent with the blade arms of a Threshian warrior, and the placement suggests someone familiar with their execution traditions. Skaral of the Threshian Collective, who had pushed through the crowd to see the body, made a sound of outrage that clicked and buzzed through the morning air. "You accuse my people of this atrocity." "No," Marcus said calmly. "I am pointing out that someone wants us to accuse your people, but the angle is wrong." "Explain," Corax demanded. A Threshian's blade arms curve inward toward their body, which means a killing stroke would naturally arc from right to left when facing a victim. These wounds arc from left to right, which is the pattern you would expect from someone standing behind the victim and reaching around with a blade held in their right hand. The silence that followed was absolute. Every delegate in the garden understood what Marcus was saying, that Ambassador Lyrian had been killed by someone who wanted to start a war between the Volanthi hegemony and the Threshian Collective, and who had made a mistake that only someone intimately familiar with killing would notice. "You speak with great certainty for a representative of a species that has barely learned to travel between stars," Corax said slowly. "I speak with certainty because I have spent 20 years studying how things die. It is my job to understand violence, High Arbiter, and I am very good at my job." "And what does your understanding tell you about this crime?" Marcus looked around the garden, at the beautiful plants and the peaceful water, and the dead woman who had shown kindness to humanity when she had no reason to do so. "This was not an assassination," he said quietly. "This was a message. Someone wanted Ambassador Lyrian to die in pain in a sacred space, in a way that would point blame at an innocent party and shatter the council before it could accomplish anything. This was an act of war disguised as a murder." The Volanthi delegate, a younger male whose bioluminescence flickered with barely controlled grief and rage, pushed forward through the crowd. "Then we will have war," he said in a voice that trembled with fury. "We will find those responsible, and we will burn their worlds until nothing remains." "That," Marcus said softly, is exactly what the killer wants. The Council of Stars had gathered to build peace now, less than 1 day into the proceedings. It stood on the edge of a conflict that could consume 1,000 worlds, and somewhere in the crowd, Marcus knew the real killers were watching their plan unfold with satisfaction. He caught Dr. Yuki Tanaka's eye across the garden and saw his own determination reflected. In her face, they had no authority here. They had no power, but they had something the elder races had forgotten: the stubborn refusal to accept that some problems could not be solved. Ambassador Lyrian had believed humanity had something to offer the galaxy. Marcus intended to prove her right, even if he had to tear apart a conspiracy spanning 3 galactic powers to do it. The council fractured like glass struck by a hammer in the hours following Lyrian's murder. The Volanthi delegation screamed for vengeance, while the Threscians bristled at the implied accusation, and 3 other species quietly ordered their warships to begin moving toward Nexus Prime. High Arbiter Corax attempted to maintain order, but even his 10,000 years of authority seemed insufficient to calm beings whose rage had been building since before humanity discovered fire. Marcus watched it all from the observation deck, his mind working through possibilities while his body remained perfectly still. The 3 suspects he had identified the previous night were behaving exactly as he expected. Lord Vexorus of the Ascendancy offered sympathetic platitudes while subtly encouraging the Volanthi rage. Syndicate Master Grell of the Korath pushed for immediate military action against the Threscians, and Corax himself seemed determined to slow the investigation in ways that would allow tensions to boil over. It was beautiful in its ugliness, a perfectly orchestrated cascade of manipulation designed to destroy the Council and everything it represented. "You were right," Dr. Yuki Tanaka said as she joined him at the observation window. "The toxicology report came back, and what I found changes everything." "Tell me." Lyrian was paralyzed before she was killed. There was a compound in her system that would have frozen her muscles while leaving her fully conscious and aware. She felt everything that was done to her and could not move or cry out. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, allowing himself to feel the horror of that death before putting it away in the locked room inside his mind, where he kept things too terrible to carry openly. What kind of compound? That is the interesting part. It does not match any known species biochemistry. It is completely synthetic, manufactured specifically for this murder, which means we are not dealing with a crime of passion or opportunity. We are dealing with a conspiracy, one with resources enough to create custom poisons and knowledge enough to know exactly how to kill a Volanthi ambassador. Marcus nodded slowly, pieces falling into place in his mind like components of a weapon being assembled. "What else did you find?" Yuki pulled out a small device and projected data into the air between them. "I found traced DNA on her body, 3 sources, all from species that are supposed to be allies: the Kara Syndicate, the Dominion, and the Ascendancy of Pale Light. The same 3 I have been watching." "Yes, but here is what makes it truly damning. The DNA was not left by accident. It was placed deliberately, almost like a signature, as if whoever did this wanted to mark their work. They are confident," Marcus said quietly. "Confident enough to leave evidence that could expose them because they believe no one will ever be in a position to use it." "Can we use it?" "Not yet. DNA evidence means nothing without context. And any accusation against 3 major galactic powers made by a human would be laughed out of whatever passes for court around here. We need more." "How do we get more?" Marcus was silent for a long moment, watching the stars wheel past the observation window while his mind ran through scenarios and rejected them one by one. Finally, he turned to Yuki with an expression she had learned to dread over their years working together. "I am going to do something illegal," he said calmly. "Of course you are." "Several illegal things?" Actually, possibly illegal enough to start an interstellar incident if I am caught. Marcus, they killed her because she was kind. Yuki, they killed her because she believed in peace and cooperation and the better angels of every species. Nature, I cannot let that stand. Yuki studied him for a long moment, then sighed and handed him a small case she had been carrying. Medical override codes for the station's security systems. I acquired them through channels I would rather not discuss. They will get you into most places, though not all. How did you know I would need these? I have known you for 15 years. Marcus, I always know when you are about to do something stupid and brave. He took the case and slipped it into his pocket, then placed a hand on her shoulder in a gesture of gratitude that words could not express. If this goes wrong, get our people off this station and back to Earth. Tell them what we found and let humanity decide how to respond. It will not go wrong. It might. Then I will make sure the people who killed Lyrian regret it for however long they have left to live now go. Before I remember that I'm supposed to be the sensible one, Marcus went. The next 12 hours were the most intense of his life, and he had lived through moments that would have broken most people. He moved through the station like a ghost, using the medical codes to access areas that should have been sealed, planting listening devices he had built from components scavenged from his own equipment, and gathering information through methods that would have appalled his diplomatic training instructors. He broke into Lord Vexorus's private quarters while the Ascendancy delegate attended a memorial service for Lyrian, and what he found there made his blood run cold. Encrypted communications detailing the entire conspiracy laid out in clinical detail. The organization called itself the Quiet Extinction, and its goal was nothing less than the destruction of the Council of Stars and the reordering of galactic civilization under the control of 3 species who had decided that cooperation was weakness and dominance was the only path to survival. Ambassador Lyrian had been killed because her mediation efforts were succeeding too well, bringing species together in ways that threatened the conspirators' plans for division and war. And the next target was already selected, High Arbiter Corax. Despite his involvement in the conspiracy had apparently outlived his usefulness, he was scheduled to die at the closing ceremony, killed by a weapon that would be traced directly to humanity's delegation. Earth would be blamed for assassinating the galaxy's most respected law enforcement official, and the resulting outrage would see humanity wiped from existence before they could become a threat to anyone's plans. Marcus copied everything he found and slipped back into the station's public areas with minutes to spare before Vexorus returned to his quarters. He had the evidence he needed. Now he just had to figure out how to use it before the conspirators figured out what he had done. 26 hours remained until the closing ceremony. 26 hours to prevent a galactic war and expose a conspiracy that spanned 3 of the most powerful species in known space. Marcus had faced impossible odds before. He had never faced anything quite like this, but he was Earth's guardian, chosen because humanity needed someone willing to fight the battles that could not be won through diplomacy alone, and he had no intention of letting his species down. Marcus began with Lord Vexorus because the Ascendancy delegate was the weakest link in the chain. The ethereal being had joined the Quiet Extinction for power and profit, not because he believed in their cause. And that made him vulnerable to the kind of pressure Marcus was prepared to apply. It was 3 hours past midnight station time when Marcus appeared in Vexorus's sealed quarters. The Ascendancy security team, 4 beings of pure energy who should have been impossible to bypass, lay scattered across the floor in states of disrupted consciousness that would take hours to recover from. Humans had learned long ago that even energy beings needed to maintain certain frequencies to function. And Marcus had spent considerable time researching exactly which frequencies to disrupt. Vexorus materialized from his resting state to find the human sitting calmly in his private chair, holding a data chip that contained enough evidence to destroy 3 galactic empires. "Good evening, Lord Vexorus," Marcus said in a voice as calm as still water. "We need to talk about Ambassador Leary. How did you get in here? This is impossible. You are human. You cannot possibly have the technology to—" "I did not use technology. I used patience and observation, and a willingness to do things the more civilized beings would consider beneath them now. We can do this the easy way or the hard way." Vexorus's form flickered with what might have been fear or might have been calculation. "You cannot threaten me. I am a delegate of the ascendancy of Pale Light. My government will destroy your entire species if you harm me." "I am not going to harm you," Marcus said, and his smile made Vexorus wish that harm was actually what the human intended. "I am going to ask you questions, and you are going to answer them truthfully. And then I am going to leave, and you are going to pretend this never happened. And if I refuse, then I will release the evidence. I have already gathered evidence that proves your involvement in Ambassador Lyrian's murder and your membership in an organization called the Quiet Extinction. The Galanthi hegemony will declare war on the ascendancy within hours, and your species does not have the military strength to survive that conflict. You would doom your own species, as well humanity will be caught in the crossfire. Humanity has been caught in crossfires before we survived them. Can your species say the same?" The silence that followed stretched for nearly a minute before Vexorus's form stabilized into something approaching resignation. "What do you want to know?" 4 hours later, Marcus emerged from Vexorus's quarters with names, dates, locations, and a detailed understanding of exactly how the Quiet Extinction planned to assassinate High Arbiter Corax and blame humanity for the crime. He had not physically harmed Vexorus in any way. He had simply asked questions with a patience and persistence that had somehow been more terrifying than any threat of violence. Vexorus would later describe the experience to his therapist as feeling like being slowly dissected by someone who genuinely wanted to understand how every piece of him worked by dawn. Marcus had confirmed everything Vexorus had told him through independent sources. The assassination would take place during the closing ceremony, using a weapon that had been stolen from Earth's embassy 3 days before the delegation even arrived at Nexus Prime. The conspirators had been planning this for years, and humanity had been chosen as the scapegoat because they were new enough to the galactic stage that no one would question their guilt. Marcus shared his findings with Yuki and their third companion, Lieutenant David Chun. In a secure location he had established in the station's maintenance tunnels. "We have everything we need," Yuki said after reviewing the evidence. "Enough to expose the entire conspiracy and clear humanity of any involvement in the assassination. Except we cannot use it," David pointed out grimly. "Any evidence gathered through illegal means will be dismissed by the Council. They will assume we fabricated it to protect ourselves." David is right, Marcus agreed. "We need to catch them in the act. We need to let the assassination attempt proceed far enough to prove our case. Then stop it before Corax actually dies." "That is insane," Yuki said flatly. "Yes. You are talking about gambling the life of the galaxy's highest law enforcement official on your ability to stop an assassin mid-strike." "Yes. And if you fail, humanity gets blamed anyway, and we all die." "Also yes." David and Yuki exchanged looks that communicated 15 years of shared experience working with Marcus Cole. "What do you need from us?" David asked finally. "I need you to get our evidence to someone trustworthy, someone outside the conspiracy who can verify it independently." "The Threshian delegate?" "Skaral seems like our best option." "Why Skaral?" "Because the Threshians were framed for Lyrian's murder, They have every reason to want the truth exposed and no connection to the conspirators, so all will listen. What about you? I will be at the closing ceremony when the assassin makes their move. I will stop them. How? Marcus's smile was not pleasant. By being exactly what the elder races think humans are: violent, unpredictable, and very difficult to kill. The closing ceremony began at sunset station time, filling the grand amphitheater with delegates from every species represented at the council. High Arbiter Corax stood at the central podium, delivering a speech about unity and cooperation that rang hollow given the tension simmering just beneath the surface. Marcus sat with the human delegation, his hands folded calmly in his lap, his eyes scanning the chamber for threats he knew were coming. The conspirators had made one mistake in their planning. They had assumed that humans were too primitive to understand what was happening around them. They had forgotten that Earth was a death world, and that the beings who survived death worlds learned to see danger in every shadow. Marcus spotted the assassin 3 seconds before they made their move. It was a shimmer in the air near the eastern entrance, a distortion in light that suggested cloaking technology far beyond anything humanity possessed. Moving with purpose toward the podium where Corax continued his speech unaware, Marcus was already in motion. He crossed 30 feet of open floor in the time it took to assemble delegates to register that something was wrong, his body moving with a speed and precision that shocked beings who had never witnessed true combat. The assassin revealed now as a surgically modified killing machine, part organic and part mechanical, designed for exactly this kind of precision strike. Had exactly 4 seconds to process the fact that a human was somehow between it and its target. It did not survive long enough to complete that processing. Marcus hit the assassin with techniques he had learned in the dark places of Earth's history, methods developed by cultures that understood violence as an art form and survival as the only metric that mattered. The cloaking device shattered first, revealing the assassin's true form, a nightmare of blades and armor and targeting systems that should have made it unstoppable. Marcus did not care what it should have been. He cared only about what it was: a threat to be eliminated, a problem to be solved, an obstacle between him and the justice that Ambassador Leering deserved. The fight lasted 4 seconds. When it was over, Marcus stood in the center of the amphitheater, covered in blood and lubricant and things he preferred not to identify, surrounded by the wreckage of the galaxy's most advanced killing machine. The silence that followed was absolute. Every delegate in the chamber stared at the human who had just done something impossible. And for the first time since humanity had crawled out of Earth's oceans, the elder races understood that they had made a terrible mistake in underestimating these small, fragile, terrifyingly persistent beings. "My name is Marcus Cole," he said into that silence, his voice carrying to every corner of the amphitheater. "I am Earth's guardian, and I have evidence that 3 of your member species have conspired to destroy this council and start a war that would kill trillions." The room erupted into chaos, and Marcus smiled, because chaos was exactly what he needed. The chaos that followed Marcus's declaration lasted exactly 3 seconds before it transformed into something far more dangerous. Lord Vexorus screamed something in a language that existed only as pure frequency, and 6 more assassins materialized from hidden positions throughout the amphitheater. Syndicate Master Grell rose from his seat with magma flowing from his stone body like blood from an open wound, his massive form already moving toward the podium where High Arbiter Corax stood frozen in shock. And throughout the chamber, beings who had seemed like ordinary delegates revealed themselves as operatives of the quiet extinction, weapons appearing from concealed locations as the conspiracy made its final desperate move. They had planned for years. They had resources spanning 3 galactic empires, They had technology that made humanity's greatest achievements look like children playing with sticks. What they did not have was Marcus Cole's complete and absolute refusal. To lose the first assassin reached him in less than a second. Blades extended for a killing stroke that should have ended the fight before it truly began. Marcus was not there when the blades arrived. He had already moved, his body flowing through space with a fluidity that seemed impossible for a species supposedly limited by fragile bones and soft tissue. And his counterstrike crushed the assassin's primary neural cluster before it could process what had happened. Two more came at him simultaneously from opposite directions, their attacks coordinated by quantum-linked targeting systems that predicted his movements a full second before he made them. The targeting systems had not been programmed for a being who had spent 20 years learning to move in ways that no mathematical model could predict. Marcus twisted between them like water flowing around stones, using their own momentum against them, turning their coordinated attack into a collision that left both assassins damaged and confused. He finished them with strikes that elder race martial arts masters would later study for decades, trying to understand how a human could have possibly known to target those specific weak points. Syndicate Master Grell reached the podium and raised a hand that could crush starship hulls. His burning eyes fixed on High Arbiter Corax with murderous intent. Marcus intercepted him with a running leap that should have been suicide. A high human body against a being of living stone and magma was not a fight. It was a statement of intent, but Marcus had studied the Korath extensively during his preparation for this mission, and he knew something that Grell had forgotten in his arrogance. The Korath were not solid stone throughout. They had veins of cooler material that carried their equivalent of blood, and those veins were vulnerable to precisely applied pressure. Marcus drove his reinforced gloves into 3 specific points on Grell's body, disrupting the flow of magma that gave the Syndicate Master his strength. Grell roared in pain and confusion as his form destabilized, his attack on Corax forgotten as he struggled to maintain cohesion. Marcus did not give him time to recover. The next 3 minutes were later described by witnesses as the moment the galaxy realized it had been wrong about humanity. Marcus moved through the amphitheater like a force of nature, engaging assassins and conspirators with a precision and violence that shocked beings who had not witnessed true combat in millennia. He killed 9 beings in under 2 minutes, saved High Arbiter Corax twice more when opportunistic attackers tried to complete their mission despite the chaos, and at one point used a ceremonial banner pole as an improvised weapon with such devastating effectiveness that the Threshin warrior cast would later request copies of the security footage for their training archives. Lord Vexorus tried to flee when it became clear that the conspiracy had failed, his ethereal form shifting toward a frequency that would allow him to pass through the station's walls. Marcus had anticipated this. He had planted frequency disruptors throughout the chamber during his preparations, and Vexorus found himself trapped in solid form for perhaps the first time in his existence. Going somewhere? Marcus asked as he approached the Ascendancy delegate with blood dripping from his hands and death in his eyes. Vexorus surrendered without further resistance when it was finally over. Marcus stood alone in the center of the chamber, surrounded by the bodies of the quiet extinction's finest operatives. His suit was ruined beyond repair. His left arm hung at an angle that suggested multiple fractures. Blood dripped from a gash across his forehead where something sharp had come far too close to killing him, and he was smiling. "The evidence is on the data chip in my right pocket," he said conversationally, addressing the stunned delegates who remained in their seats. "I would retrieve it myself, but I think my collarbone is broken, Ambassador. Lyrian deserved better than to be a pawn in someone else's game." So do all of you. Then, very carefully, he sat down on the floor and passed out from blood loss and exhaustion. He woke 3 days later in a Volante medical facility, surrounded by equipment that was rebuilding his shattered body with technology humanity would not develop for another century. Thala Kale, Ambassador Lyrian's sister and her successor as head of the Volante delegation, sat beside his bed with an expression that mixed grief and gratitude and something that might have been hope. You avenged her, Thala said when she saw his eyes open. My people do not forget such debts. I did not do it for debt, Marcus replied, his voice rough from days of disuse. I did it because it was right. Thala studied him with those bioluminescent eyes that reminded him so much of her sister. That is precisely why humanity frightens the elder races. Commander, not because you are violent. For many species are violent, not because you are persistent. For many species are persistent, but because you are violent and principled at the same time. You have not yet learned to separate the two. Maybe we never will. No, Thala agreed softly. Perhaps you will not, and perhaps that is exactly what the galaxy needs. The Council of Stars continued its proceedings, though its membership changed significantly in the following months. The Korra Syndicate faced sanctions that would take generations to overcome. The rogue elements within the Dominion were purged by High Arbiter Korax himself, who had emerged from the incident with a newfound respect for the species he had once dismissed as primitive, and the ascendancy of Pale Light entered a period of internal chaos that would eventually result in a more peaceful government. Rising from the ashes of the old humanity's status in the galactic community shifted overnight. They were no longer children to be humored or primitives to be studied. They were something else entirely, a species that remembered what violence truly meant and could be trusted to use it in service of justice. Earth's guardian returned home a hero, though he refused all official recognition and declined 17 different offers of advancement within humanity's fledgling interstellar government. He had work to do. He explained. The galaxy was vast, and there were other conspiracies forming in the dark places between stars. Other innocents who needed protection, other wrongs that needed to be made right on his last night before departing for his next mission. Marcus stood at the observation window of Earth's orbital station and watched the planet of his birth turn slowly against the infinite black. Somewhere out there, Ambassador Lyrian's killers were facing justice. Somewhere out there, the elder races were learning that humanity was not to be underestimated. And somewhere out there, among the countless stars that had seemed so impossibly distant just 40 years ago, a place was being carved for humanity, not as servants or students, but as equals. Earth's children were taking their place among the stars, and the galaxy would never be the same. Marcus smiled at his reflection in the window, then turned and walked toward whatever challenges awaited him next. He was Earth's guardian, and he had a job to do.